Morning. Today, I would like to give again the shir that I gave last night in Shul, on Shabbos. Um, it's as this week's Parsha, Bechukoysay, there is a loisase, which is mentioned this week's Parsha, but is actually only counted in the Chinuch in Parsha Shoftim, which is loisokim Matzeivoh. This today, just before we came back from Hakomas Matzeivoh from my father, and so I wanted to focus on the concept of a Matzeivoh, in general, the Matzeivoh that is on the Mizbeach, but also to explain a little bit the concept of a Matzeivoh that we put over a kever, over a burial place of a deceased. Sorry. There was a special din in the Hakomas Matzeivoh that we had. Normally, I think the rabbinate would not have let doing in Hakomas Matzeivoh, but for some reasons they allowed me, and then they said that we are not allowed to give any hesped, any eulogy, because it's 30 days within the Yom Tov, within the upcoming Yom Tov of Shavuos. And actually, this is a Mishnah Mufureshes that says. This is Mishnah, sorry, in Moed Kotten, Perik Aleph, and Mishnah. I can't see it here properly, but this is in the middle of the Perik Aleph. It says, there should be no hesped before 30 days of Yom Tov, within the 30 days that precedes the Yom Tov. There are two reasons that the Gemara brings down. One of the reasons is either because you're going to spend too much money on the hesped, but the other reason is that because you are bringing a bad spirit, in mood, that you are making people sad just before Yom Tov, and this sadness should not reflect and should not come into the regel, into the Yom Tov. And so we were not allowed to be masked, but there was a whole shaila of reading the Matzeivoh, the text that's written in Matzeivoh, is the hesped or not. And so apparently this is clearly not. We're allowed to make a hesped, but then not mamish hesped, but it can be more of an inspirational speech. But in any case, it's Mishnah Mufureshes, which is also brought down in Halacha. There is something, however, that precedes the din in the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts with Rab Meir, which says whether or not on Chol HaMoed a person is allowed to, a Kohen is allowed to look at Magois Negoim, if they're allowed to decide if something is Tumah or Tohor. But Oidom Rabbi Meir, Melaket Odom Atzmos Ovi V'imoy. So in the Mishnah it says that a person is allowed to collect the bones that are from his father or his mother. And then he says, why are you allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed? Because it's for him, it's a simcha. Rabbi Yossi Omer Evelula. Rabbi Yossi is choilek, disagrees with Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yossi holds that Eveloi, this is a day of when you are mourning. It brings you sadness. But Rabbi Meir holds that it brings you happiness, and I would like to discuss that. How come that Rabbi Meir holds that? What does it mean? And what is Rab Meir, what we call the Shittosoi? Rab Meir in another place says something else, and I would like to combine both to explain how come that collecting bones is something which brings a simcha. There is even a shaila, if it brings a simcha, then why don't we say Ein Ma'aven Simcha Besimcha? But that's another topic that I will not touch today. So what is Melaket Atzomos? In beginning, I was always used to learn that Melaket Atzomos is something which is an accidental happening, that a person was found after a year and it's only got his bones, and we are Melaket Atzomos, to put them into a proper burial place. Or it can be somebody that passed away in a place where they were not capable of bringing him over. They first buried him on the spot. And then when the possibility arises, then they are Melaket Atzumes, they are collecting the bones, and then they put them in the little box, and then they ship it over to where the final destination should be. However, the Meforshim there explain not like that. They said that apparently it is even a lekatchila. In other words, this was a kind of a tradition that existed. The Tiferet Yisrael on the spot brings it down, and he refers to Meseches Smochos. In Meseches Smochos, there are two prokim, Perek 13 and 14, are related to what happens when you are melaket atzomos. So whether or not on this particular day do you also have to mourn? Are you put from Kriyat Shema? What type of avelus is that? Do you have to make kriya or not? This is the whole prokim that speaks specifically for the one that is melaket, that is collecting the bones. And also it says in Perek 14 that he even tells a story of somebody that actually asked to his son to do this lekatchila, and I will read you the exact text. Omar Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzodok. This is in Perek 12 and 13, not 13 and 14, like I said, but 12 and 14. On Perek 12, it brings down that Omar Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzodok, Kach Omar li Abba. That's how my father told me, B'shas misosi, after I pass away, Kovreni tchilo bebiko, you should bury me first in a biko, or besoiv, meaning after exactly a year time, laket atzmi, then you should be melaket, should collect my bones, utnein begluskemo, put them in a gluskemo, bererin. But you should not do it ato beyotro, you should not do it with your bare hands, but you should do it covered, out of bizoin and covered for the mess. So apparently it was a particular tradition to lekatchila do a burial in two steps. So the first step was to bury the dead person in his flesh and bones into the ground, or as I thought maybe to say that these were the burial pits that you see where there are in caves, where there are holes, dig down in caves, deep holes. You put the body there and the body decays completely, and what is left over is only the bones. And then once the bones have been dried up, then you can go and be melaket and collect them and put them in a container and then bring them to a proper burial place. It's very interesting. When you go to the Israel Museum in Yerushalayim, you will suddenly, there are now, when I was there a few years ago, they are exposed and put in really in full exposition. They found a lot of those tiny little ossuaries. Ossuaries is the word for boxes that were used for bones. And actually, they were not very big. They are quite small, like half a meter or maybe 40 centimeters, not very big. But they are from stone, and they're also very nicely ornated. They have colorful, all kind of pictures done on them. And they even have names that are written on the side of them. And this is a very interesting concept. They found it only in Yerushalayim, and it seems to be produced and used in the end of the second Beis Hamikdash. So apparently there was a minhag to lekatchila do that. Now, from the fact itself that the boxes were quite small and they were nicely decorated, and even with a name on it, it seems that they were not buried again. So my personal opinion is on that part is that they used to bury the person in the ground or maybe in the caves to let all the flesh disintegrate and let the bones come out and be free and dried up. And then they used to collect the bones, and they put the bones in such a way that they can fit in a little box. And then this little box was done probably, I believe, kept in a special place in the home or a special house where the family burial was kind of a communal family house or room, and they were stacked on top of each other. The reason why I'm saying that is if it is so well decorated, it seems that if it would be buried in the ground, I don't think that they would have decorated it. Plus also, why would they write the names on them? So it seems that they were kept and probably for display for when to be able to go there and see the ossuary from time to time. Otherwise, also they will not put the names on them. The reason why they were made of limestone or klicheres is because only klicheres, only metama from inside, not from the outside, and so it's not a problem for Kohen to have that even in his house. So it's just a way of keeping it. And probably it was a minhag that existed in the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, We see it, of course, there is a Likud Atzomus, Yosef Atzadik, but there was a reason why, and so there was a political reason why they had to do it in two steps. But in generally, we do assume that that it was not done afterwards and it was not done before. It was really a minig that existed in the time of the Tanuim, the ones that actually, like a few hundred years at the end of the Beis Hamikdash, the end and maybe even past the second Beis Hamikdash. That's not clear. But so basically, the Likud Atzomus seems to have been kind of do you call it a minig of that was done lekatchila. The question that I would like to continue a little bit next is, in this week's parsha we see le soki Matzeivoh, that there's a issue, there's a law not to build a Matzeivoh. The Rambam holds a Matzeivoh means a construction, just like what we do when we put it on a burial place, is like a stone, a perfect stone, well cut in all sides, and like a cube, or maybe I don't know what type of shape. But that normally that was used indeed to make a certain avodah, to serve some kind of god. But in general, it's the idea that the Rishonim hold that the pshat is that it's Matzeivoh is a mizbeach of one stone. As you know, mizbeach avonim ta'asoli, so a mizbeach has to have multiple stones. They're not allowed to be of one big stone. And therefore this is the law. So there's a mitzvah said to do it of multiple stone, and there is a loisa said to actually do it of one stone. It has to be of multiple stones, and that's something which is for me a bit strange, because we are continuously in the whole Judaism, especially of today, or let's put it that way, of during the medieval times, it was clear that the whole idea of Judaism is to bring to the belief that the Ribono Shel Olam is one. But not just one, it's a yichud, it's the whole, the Hanogas HaYichud, like the Ramchal calls this, is to celebrate the fact that the Ribono Shel Olam is one, and then suddenly, somehow, he created a multitude, and we are in this multitude, but we have to believe that whenever we go back to the source of where we come from, this is a complete oneness. And so when I would thought that in the Beis Hamikdash, which represents everything that happens up there, then the Mizbeach at least should indeed be of one stone to represent the oneness of Hashem. And so that's already one of the difficulties that I would like to just give a little answer to that. It's something that to believe that the Ribono Shel Olam is one can be represented by a stone that is completely as one big stone and not composed of multiple stones. This on itself would also be considered as apikorsus. Because the oneness that we believe in Hashem, says the Rambam says it's a oneness that cannot even be represented in this world. Because in there he based himself on the logic of Aristotle. So there is a very interesting logic that the Rambam uses to come to this conclusion that the Ribono Shel Olam is one, and that there is not a composite material like in the current world, but it is a oneness that we cannot even comprehend. But what we could do is at least to come to this conclusion with some logic that he used from Aristotle. So Aristotle has a whole list of logic rules that he has introduced. The Rambam took all those rules and he actually uses them in order to prove certain elements of his what he believes is the Ikre Hadas, and then he introduces them into the Yisoda Torah and in the Yud Gimel Likrim, that when a person does not believe in them is actually apikoyres. The rules that you can imagine are actually the rules that you can for example, one of the rules that we use, but it's not from Aristo, but just to give you an example, there are certain rules that we all know. If A is smaller than B and B is smaller than C, then A is definitively smaller than C. So this seems to be logical rules that we use in our day-to-day life. And so therefore there is also, Aristo has created those rules, but which has to do more with the physics, with nature, with metaphysics, with divine, etc. And he also developed that rules, which he has been able to kind of logically prove each one of them. But once they've been proven, then you can use them in order to build a logic to prove other points and new points that came out from it. And one of those, for example, is that God is is a simple, very in the simplicity and undividable, and is a oneness that is the oneness that we cannot understand, because every oneness that we have is something that eventually, theoretically, you can always split in two. So, but this is not possible of Hashem. If you would say that Hashem is a oneness, is like a monolithical system, that would still mean that you can still break it into. And if you can break it into, it means that the one piece is still composed of multiple pieces, of at least two pieces. And if something is composed of two pieces, it means also that there must be somebody that put them together. And this is one of the rules that always the murkav, kol murkav tzorich lemarkiv. Everything that is composed must be that there is somebody that composed them together. And so this is the logic that the Rambam uses in Aristo, and therefore he comes to the conclusion that if Hashem would be like a oneness that we know, like a one stone, in that case, it would mean that since the stone can be broken in two, even if it's not possible, but because we don't have the tools, but theoretically you can imagine, even in your Gedachten experiment, that you can break the stone or whatever it is in two, and therefore that would mean that this oneness is not a one, but it is a composition of two. And something that is composed of two, by definition, must be that there is somebody that caused it to be actually composed and become one. And that's, he says, it's not possible, because it then means that you're not looking at the right God. You should be looking at the God that has actually composed those two together. And so we go straight to the cause of everything, and this comes to the Rebbeinu Shlem, to the Kudsha B'richu. The problem that I had, and not only me, apparently a lot of the Rishonim had it in the time of the Rambam when it got printed out, is that they banned this particular beginning part of the Rambam, and apparently it was for the same reason, the critique on the Rambam, that he has put that into the Shloshes Ikrim Shel HaTorah. And he put that in the Yesod HaTorah, which is quite shocking, because it's not something that Chazal are mentioning. There is no mentioning at all in the Torah, in the Tanakh, but also not in Chazal. The Rambam finds one reference where he claims that this is a proof from Chazal. On the other hand, there are millions of Chazals that are actually speaking about Hashem being sitting on a throne, people coming up there, seeing the Shekhinah, seeing how the Rebbeinu puts on tefillin. The Torah speaks about the Etzba Elokim, Yad Hashem. The Rebbeinu has eyes, he hears, he can speak, he has a beard. Kabbalah has completely a lot of information about that. The Chazal that give the height of Hashem in terms of how many thousands and thousands of amas are even the little parts of his body. And so basically it's not something that we have in Chazal. Now, not that we disagree with the Rambam, of course, and we know that these are all not to be taken literally, but still, the fact itself that the Rambam puts it in the Yesod HaTorah and makes it, a person does not believe in it and apikoros, is a very, very harsh decision that he has made, because that means that if a person is what we can call a bit naive and not very intellectual developed, and he's a very holy man, and he learns the Chumash and he learns the Gemara, and whenever the Chumash says about the Yad Hashem, he's imagining that the Rebbeinu Shlem has a hand, and when he learns that the Rebbeinu Shlem sits on the Kisei HaKovod, and he believes that the Rebbeinu Shlem suddenly sits down, and he puts on himself his crown on Rosh Hashanah, and that when he davens to a picture of a person with a long white beard, a fatherly figure, etc. According to the Rambam, this would actually mean that there is an apikos, and this is very harsh and very out of proportion, because it's not written nowhere. And in the contrary, every text is actually pointing to the opposite of what the Rambam is saying, although nobody disagrees with the concept, with the truth on itself, but not that it is part of the Jewish fundamentals. In any case, it has been rejected, the claim against the Rambam, apparently, and we still have the Shloshes Ikrim, and one of them is that Eino de Musa Guf, Eino Guf. So basically, this has been clearly accepted. So I would like to speak now about another kind of, that's why, we can understand that the Mizbeach, the Rebbeinu Shlem says not to build it of one stone, but to build it on multiple stone, In other words, it's not the oneness of the stone that would even represent God. It's not going to represent, because even a stone that is of one piece can be broken in two. And so therefore it is still a composed material. And so anyway, you will not be able to represent Hashem. There is nothing that can represent Hashem in this world. And so therefore the Mizbeach of one stone would also be in heresy according to the Rambam. However, when we are burying a person, we are putting a Matzeivoh, and this is already our overs used the Matzeivos to bury their beloved ones. They put a Matzeivoh, and so the Lo Yisokim Lecho Matzeivoh Ki Sono Hashem Elokecho is something which we do, but when we on top of a mess. And I would like to understand, in that case, why do we use it on the mess, on the dead body, on the burial place? We do use a Matzeivoh, while it's clearly Hashem does not like to have Matzeivos in general. Even like the Rambam, even if it's not a Mizbeach, but just to have a Matzeivoh in the country is not something which is allowed to have. According to Rambam, somebody puts up a Matzeivoh is Chayav Malkus. And so why do we having it specifically on the burial place and as a tombstone? So for this, before that, I would like to introduce again something quite philosophical that was created by the two Greek philosophers. I mean, one big philosopher which is called Plato, and he introduced in the world the concept of what is called the highly, and I think it's called the Morpheus or Morphe of something like that, which is meaning it is the matter and the shape and the form. So the highly is the matter and of what something is composed of, and then you have the morph, which is actually the form of what it is, creates the identity of what it is. You have a table, and then you can have a wooden table. The table would be recognized by its shape. This is called in Hebrew, it's called the tsuro, and then in the more modern Hebrew, the matter that is composed, the wood that composes to become a table, would be called the choimer. And so that concept has been developed by Plato and Aristo. There is a big machlokus, a big disagreement. Plato believed that the choimer is on this world, but the tsuro, in other words, the concept, abstract concept of what a table is something that is upon higher than us. It's not on this world. In other words, on this world, you will anyway never find a table, a perfect table. Every table that you find on this world is only an approximation. It's very similar to the original real table that is defined as a transcendent concept that we can only imagine in our imagination. And when we see a table on this world, we say, hey, this looks very similar to the concept of a table. This was Plato, but Aristo believed that no, it is within the table that hides the table as a definition, as a concept. And so it's not up there, but it's actually within the choimer, within the shape, within the material that has been shaped, that you can find whether something is a table or not. It's a machlokas that actually it's a beautiful painting in the Renaissance. They made a painting of Plato and Aristo, and Plato points his finger up and Aristo points his finger down, kind of saying this world is the real table, and Plato says no, the real table exists only in the upper world, in the world of machshovas, the world of concept and abstraction, transcendence, if you want. And so this, of course, we believe in Aristo. The Rambam believes in Aristo, and therefore the Rambam also actually has this concept very much in his books, and even in his Torah he speaks about the tsuro and the goylem. So the set of the word choimer, which has been used later, specifically by the Maharal, the Rambam uses the word goylem. It's another word for choimer and for material. And so he introduced this also in his Torah, I think in Perek Dalet, where he brings it also down. In the one that has really used it frequently and very, very much, and even expanded the definition of what the difference between those two, the choimer and the tsuro, is the Maharal. The Maharal uses it a lot, in maybe probably even 50 times that you will find it. Basically, he also interchange a little bit, and he expands the definition of, I don't know if the Greek would have appreciated is the way that he uses it, but in any case, he uses this a lot in all his sforim of Machshava, where for him, for example, the neshama is the tzuro, and the guf is the choimer. So basically, because the neshama is within, like Aristotle says, the neshama is within the guf. And it's not something like Plato would say that the neshama is something that is possibly high up, and the guf is only following, is maybe a little bit attached, or there is kind of a I don't know, connection that exists between the two. But the neshama is within us, and it's the one, and the guf is the what is englobes and envelopes the whole neshama. And so this is the whole idea of the difference between the choimer and the tzuro, with machlokes between Aristo and Plato, and Rambam believes like Aristo, but they also continues. Even the Kabbalists have taken that concept. I'm not sure if they use the word choimer and tzuro, but what they do is definitely they have the concept of the oil and the kli, which you use a lot, and this is also quite similar to the concept of the tzuro, which is the oil, and the kli, which contains and makes sure that this light is suddenly taken over a shape, and this is the choimer. This is what the choimer will do. And you could also say that's the opposite as well. So everything, as I explained, everything is also very relative. So it's not something to be taken literally. Something is a choimer and the other one is a tzuro. I think depends on the way that you look at it. Certain things can be a choimer for the tzuro, but these other things can also be a choimer for the tzuro, the first one, simply depending on what you are looking at. You can even say, for example, very easy to understand is, the bricks, they are the choimer for the tzura of the wall. So the wall is a tzura and the bricks are the choimer, that's clear. But the wall is on itself, although it's a tzura, but it's also a choimer for the house. So since the house is composed of 4 different walls, so therefore the wall in itself, being a tzura, can also be a choimer for a tzura that is above him. Again, this has been used a lot in Maharal. It has enabled us to have an extension of our vocabulary so we can understand and explain things in an easier way. I don't think that today it's been used very much. I think today we are more busy with Ruchnius and Gashmius, with Ruchnius and Chomrius, but not so much between the Tzuro and the Choimer. I think it's not something that has been in the Machshava Sforim very much used. I think it's a concept which is so abstract, and that basically there is maybe something which is missing, that maybe also the Gedolim of these last generations are not very knowledgeable in this type of thinking, because it really, the question is, of course, does it help us to a better understanding of what happens and up there in the other world, or what's happening in this world, and maybe Samar Chazal. Besides the Maharal, there is not many today that have been using it. But as I said, the Maharal uses it, for example, in things which you would not understand it as much as I understand it from Plato and Aristo. But he says that the neshama is the tzura and the guf is the choimer. What I would like to introduce now is something which is a chidush, a little bit of mine, but where I would like to say, to take it a step further, and to say actually that from within the guf, you also have a tzura and a choimer. The tzura is the bones, is the skeleton, and the choimer is the flesh. And it makes, for me personally, a lot of sense, because what keeps a human being to be a human being is his posture, is the way that he walks, the way that he stands, etc. And this gives a person what he is, and is differentiating, for example, from animals straight away, is his posture. It means the bones, because the flesh, you would rather be difficult to see a difference between the human flesh and an animal flesh. Maybe, of course, if you look on the microscope, you might find DNA structures differently, possibly, but in general, it's difficult to see. What you do see, the difference between a human and an animal is this bones, and therefore the bones is the tzuro, and the flesh is what we call the choimer, is the matter. There is also an etymological possibility to explain that and to defend that. When you think about the etzem, which is the bones, this could reflect to the atzmiut, to the what it is, the identity of the uniqueness and the individuality of what this particular is. And then you have that's why it's called an etzem. The etzem bones is an atzmiut. And then you have also the bosor. The bosor is from the same letters than besuro. So in other words, le vaser is le besuro means a communication, a message. And so the flesh gives out the message from what is within. So the structure, we have a structure which is the skeleton, and what shines out and communicates outside is the flesh. The flesh is what communicates. It hides, in essence, as we shall see, it hides the essence when it communicates, whether it can communicate the right feelings that we have inside, or it can fake, and it can become just an avatar of what we really are. This is something that we will explain. It's clear that the bones also is in the structure of the humans, in the biology of humans. The flesh is the first to disappear, and what remains theoretically forever are the bones. The bones is a structure that normally should remain forever, can remain forever, but the flesh not. And so therefore the flesh is considered something that is the choimer, that is only temporary, while the bones are representing the atzmius, representing the tzuro, and which is indeed forever, is quite nitzri. Now, we see that concept of bones and flesh, of etzem and bosor, we do find it in the Chumash. When you look in the Chumash, you do see that when Kodesh Baruch Hu created Odom Rishon, and then he saw that he was lonely, and then he created from a bone of Odom Rishon, he created Chavo. And so what does Odom Rishon say? Odom Zoisapam. Then he says something very interesting. Etzem me atzomai, uvoso mi besori. So basically what he says here, he uses exactly that, makes a difference between those two concepts. He makes a difference between an etzem and a bosor. Meaning, as Manitou wants to explain, is that the etzem atzomai represents the essence of what we are. And in the essence of what we are, possibly what Odom Rishon meant to say is that it reflects the neshama. What makes us unique as being human beings is our neshama. But when we speak about the neshama, we have to realize that both of our neshamas, both the one from Odom and Chava, actually are coming from the same source. And therefore, we share the same source. And the higher you go, the more you realize that we are all one, and that there is no difference between humans. So etzem atzoma means we share the same neshama, or both are chelek Elokah mimal, and therefore we should be considered as one. But bosor mi besori means, however, that when it comes to the chomrius, when it comes to the choimer, we are different. And this is we have different feelings, we have a different context, we have a different way of seeing things, perception, ambitions, fears, and pleasures, and etc. And so we are quite different. The difference lies in the flesh, what makes us to be different. And that's something very important, because when Chava was created, humanity, Odom Rishon, suddenly was faced with a big dilemma. How do I handle the fact that there is another person in this world? I'm not the only one. How do I interact with other people? How do I interact with the other, as Levinas would describe that, with the face of the other? And so that's a challenge that Odom Rishon was facing, is how do I both and interact with the other person as if he is me, knowing that he is completely me, in the sense that we share the same neshama, as the Ramak in Toy Medvor explained, where he says that we are all one big family, and that and therefore we should really believe so much in that whenever a person is in pain, we should also feel pain. When the person is with simcha, is in happiness, we should be happy for him, and we should feel the happiness as well. And so therefore this is the pure empathy part. This is one thing. And the second thing is also to realize and respect and even promote the difference that we have between us, and not to crush the difference that there is, the otherness, to crush him into trying to fit him completely in the way that we are ourselves. And that's a big challenge that the humanity is having, in as much that we realize the difference of the people, and we have completely forgotten, and we don't work as if we should. Actually, we are all very much human. What I didn't mention is what I once saw a quote from a somebody, a comedian, a non-comedian that I'm not going to mention his name because he is quite controversial, but he says that we actually differentiate between each other in the things that we show, but we resemble each other in the things that we hide. So we are actually, when we really think, we are all quite similar, but we try to bring out an image to differentiate ourselves, to show I am like that and you are like that. And so this is exactly that. What we show outside is that what differentiates us, but what we are inside is what we share, and we are similar, and we are actually equal. And this is why the Torah brings down, the Torah Mauritian said the 2 points. Etzem v'atzomai, also sorry, because those are two fundamental different things, and they also mean different things. The one means we are equal, and the other means that we are different. And we have to live. How do we learn to work to manage that duality? Are we different or are we similar? No, we are both. We are similar on the one hand, but also we are very much different. Levinas is very much busy with that concept, and this is maybe part of another shiur. Now, what is interesting, because we spoke about Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is the one that said that collecting the bones is a simcha. So Rabbi Meir has, there is in the Bereshis Rabbah, Medrash Rabbah, in Parsha Chof, at the end, he brings down, Vayas Hashem Elokim le'odom u'l'ishtoi kosnos oir vayalbishe. Hashem suddenly decides he's going to make them clothes of skin. And there is, of course, a question, where does the skin come from? Where does Hashem created the skin? Where did he take it from? Because theoretically, man was not allowed to kill animals, so we're assuming that Hashem also didn't kill. Where did he take the oil? I'm not going to go into that subject, but it's important that Bechukoysay, it says the Medrash, Bechukoysay shel Rabbi Meir, Motzui Kosu, Kosnois oil with an aleph. And so the Chazal explain that what they were. But basically, it was kosnois oil and kosnois ayin with an aleph or with an ayin. So in Rameir, when you read it literally, it means that Rameir had a different Sefer Torah than us. In his Sefer Torah, it was written with an aleph. Of course, we do reject this type of beliefs. Normally, I already gave a whole shiur about that some of the Rishonim believe that some letters or words might have been added or changed a little bit for making it more explainable, or for different historical reasons. But in any case, we believe that this is not true. The Rambam says that the Sefer Torah that we have is the exactly same Sefer Torah that we have from Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's not possible to have two different versions. It should have been, of course, as we have it in our Chumash, with an ayin. And if Chazal brings it down, it means, in other words, that maybe he had it as a gilyon, like a little footnote, saying that the aleph should be an ayin, or the ayin should be an aleph, etc. So the way that I think that Manitou wants to explain it is that the pshat is that Rabbi Meir is saying that originally it was an aleph, and eventually became an ayin. What does it mean? That before the chet of Odom Rishon with Chava, the flesh was covering the bones. The flesh was oil, was light. In other words, the essence, as what we explained, the bones, which represents the essence of the person, the atzmiut of the person, was completely visible, the skin was transparent, had light, was lighting out, was even giving light. In other words, the person would completely shine and give his own identity, completely free and very vulnerable as well, but he would be completely free. After the sin, Hashem has put them kosnos oil with an ayin. Suddenly we developed a skin which actually covers the flesh, and the flesh lost his light. In other words, we cover the essence of who we are, and suddenly we are in a world where the atzmus, the self, is not shown anymore and is covered. You can look at it from a negative perspective. In other words, that we are living in a world of sheker, and it's, in other words, we try to hide who we really are, as we said in the beginning, kind of an avatar of who we would like to be. And this is of course the flesh. Or you can also say some want to actually, you could say opposite as well, but in any case, let's keep it to that level. But so in other words, when the Torah says that Hashem made them a kosnos oil, meaning that not that he made them a clothes, but actually he put them skin. That is the concept of a skin that is hiding the flesh has been developed. Now that the tikkun that a person can do is actually to try to show to the people the really who he is. This can be done with clothes. That's why the Torah clothing is something which is extremely important. We have so many mitzvahs that are related around clothing, because the clothes that the person puts on is actually the light that he wants to shine from believing of what he is internal. A soldier puts on clothes of a soldier so that we know that he is in his essence a soldier. A Rov puts on rabbinic clothes in order to show that he is a Rov. And the ultimate, in the Torah, the ultimate example are the Kohanim. The Kohanim have to carry, to wear clothes specifically, which are the big dekuna. If a Kohen does not wear big dekuna, he is not a Kohen. You know, in the French, they have an expression, l'habit ne fait pas le moine, that the clothes does not make a priest, but actually in the Torah it does. If a Kohen does not wear the big dekuna, he is not a Kohen, and if he doesn't avoid it, he's considered like a Zor, and therefore he is a Chayev Misa. So basically there we see that the clothes are something which actually tries to correct of the Chet of Egel, Chet Odom Rishon, the first Chet, is in order to try to show who we really are. It's very interesting because you could also say that the clothes is actually something to cover the flesh, but to actually bring forward the tzuro. So if we will go back to how we believed originally, since the flesh is the choyme and the bones are the tzuro, so when you cover, you put on your clothes, nice clothing like for a king, what you want to show is your tzuro, meaning your posture. Like specifically women, when they want to wear clothes, they also wear clothes in order to cover the flesh and all the imperfections that might be, but they want to show is the figure. The figure is the form, and the form is the tzura of the person, where they want to be proud and to represent themselves. So the cloth is something that tries to correct what has been removed by the chet. And so that's the concept behind that. There is so in other words, the flesh is something that represents and tries to give over the how do you call it, the inside, or hides what is inside. Therefore, the flesh also is considered as a betrayal of the true self that we have inside. My father, Olav Sholem, he always used to say that beged is from boyged, from betrayal. And also me'ila, which is also kind of a betrayal, me'ila Hashem, is also a me'ila, is a clothes. And what somebody says during the shir is that the word gid which is actually what attaches the bosor to the etzem, the gid, is actually also to be magid, because it tells something. So basically, etymologically, we do have a lot of understanding. It corresponds with the ideas that we just put forward. Now, that means, in other words, that when the flesh removes itself from the bones, then the true self comes out. Because the flesh is covering and is the choimel of the human being and not his true self. And so it's possible that Rabbi Meir, that explains that indeed the flesh and the skin is what covers and does not shine the inner self, is something like a klol. And so when after a year the skin and the flesh completely disappears from the bone, then we collect only the bones, and this brings simcha. Remember that Ramir held that we are allowed to be melaket atzumos and cholamoid is because it brings simcha. Why does it bring simcha? It's because the flesh has been removed from the bones, and we have the bones only, which is the essence. And it was also this essence, the bones, that will be used for the Trias HaMesim, around which the flesh will start to grow again. So in other words, the essence, if you want, without going for the highly intellectuals, but the way that you can represent the neshama of a person that remains eternal are the bones, as we said before. So the bones represents the neshama, that represents the eternity. So that's the explanation that I would like to give on the fact that the reason why after a year of collecting the bones, it could be considered, like Ramir says, a sin. This Moshe Feinstein, he wants to add on this week's parsha on Behar Bechukoysay, multiple times he brings it down, that the reason why we're not allowed to make a mizbeach of one stone, it goes back to the mizbeach, is because Mizbeach represents the avodas Hashem, the avodas Odom, the avodah that the person has to do. And if the Mizbeach would have been of one stone, it means that this stone is perfect. It means that the Mizbeach has come to perfection. And in other words, that the person, as if the person could at one day say, I've done everything that I had to do, I've made all the mitzvahs, I've learned a lot of Torah, now it's time for me to relax and to enjoy my pension. And he says this is something which Hashem hates, son Hashem. He says, mitzvahs Matzeivoh, the Matzeivoh, even achas she'ein shayach lo'isiv oleh. He says from Moshe Feinstein, shezeh son Hashem. Af shekvar also harbe ma'asim, even though he made already a lot of mitzvahs, k'mvo b'yecheskel, shekol tzedkoyso lo'isiv kerenu. Some people, every tzedek that he did will not be reminded after his death. Ki kol ma she'oso bein b'limud, bein b'tzedakah, bein b'shar ma'asim, the person should never be happy with what he has done, and he should continuously do more and more. Similar to what the Rebbe, you see a lot in his videos when people were saying, already we built one Beis HaMedrash in this town, and then you were very proud of it. So the Rebbe used to say, why are you so happy? If you can build one, it means that you can build two. Why don't you go and hurry up and start to build two? If somebody raised $1 million, you used to say, well, if you manage to raise $1 million, why don't you go and put always the level higher and then try to raise 2 million, etc. It says exactly that. You should not say that you already done. If he could even do more, so if a person comes up with a whole bag of a lot of mitzvahs, but he could have done even more, then those big mitzvahs will not be counted. It's quite a harsh point from the Moshe Feinstein, but he says it. So this is something that somebody says, a person should be afraid of that he should not think that it is all over. And maybe originally the Matzeivoh that we put on the stone, the one stone, is kind of saying that this is it. The person has come to a resting place, and the resting place is a one stone. In other words, it's something that cannot, as the Moshe says, she'ein shaykh lo'esig oleo. So the one stoners represent the finality, or it's also called the actuality in the philosophy, apparently. There's a potential where you can still grow, and then you come to the actuality. And the one stone that we put, the matzeivoh that we put on the top, is actually represents this actuality, that you cannot add any more to it, that you come to the place when you are up there. We are called oimdim and not anymore hoilchim. There is a whole concept that has been developed also in the latest Achronim and Bale Machshova. And I've heard from Dain Simon very, very nicely how he heard it as well, I think, but it's something very nice that we indeed put a tombstone, we put a Matzeivoh on the caver that we just did this morning. But the idea is, of course, to say that the deceased is actually came to his resting place. That's it. Whatever he managed to do during his lifetime is he remains there like that in the upper worlds, in the worlds where the neshamas are. But actually, we believe that it is not true, because we are doing a lot of things for an Ilui neshama. We are Lias neshama. We believe that the neshama still can go higher by, if the children, they still make mitzvahs, if the children say Kaddish, if the children say Tehillim, if they are doing chesed, and other people are doing chesed, Ilo nishmosoy, it helps to this person, that the neshama, to still have an aliyah. So we are not there completely at rest where we were, but it's actually our children can still help us in increasing. And that is why he says, Rav Dain Simon, that he heard, is why children and also people that come and say Tehillim are putting a little stone on top of the Matzeivoh. Is, in other words, we don't agree, as if to say, we don't agree that this is a Matzeivoh of one stone, but this is a Matzeivoh of multiple stones. In other words, that person can still grow, has still potential to grow. And it is through the children that this will happen, and the people that are doing it in Nishmosoy. And that is the symbol of the little stones that have been added to make sure that we are actually breaking the Matzeivoh. Once you put a little stone on the Matzeivoh, it has lost the din of a Matzeivoh and has become like a Mizbach Avonim. I want to just to add one point, this concept from Moshe Feinstein that Mizbeach Avonim, that the idea that why does the Mizbeach have to be a multiple stones, is to show that Avodah Hashem is not finished yet, that you always have to improve yourself, is exactly, as I explained also for Shavuos, and between Pesach and Shavuos, is exactly the reason why we should not bring Se'or and Dvash. So Oyer and Dvash represents the perfection after time, what happens at the end. So a fruit that is grown, the first beginning is sour, bitter and sour, and only at the end, before he falls down, he's sweet and he's full of Dvash. Similarly, also dough, in the beginning he is very simple, but if you wait long enough, it becomes oil, it becomes actually something nice to break bread with. Sourdough bread is much better than a matzah. And so therefore, we're not allowed to bring perfection on the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach has to represent the humanity in his imperfections and in his potential to grow. And that is similar to why the Mizbeach was not allowed to be built as a Matzeivoh, as a one stone that represents kind of a perfection. Not the oneness of Hashem, but at least it represents the final destination of what human can reach. Where we take to the Geula Shleima and to Trias HaMesim, B'meir of Yameinu, Amen.